My cousin announced she was keeping my daughter because 2 weeks of babysitting made her the real mother. My cousin Rachel had been planning to keep my daughter Jenny from the moment I went into emergency surgery. While I was unconscious on the operating table, fighting a massive internal infection, Rachel was redecorating my daughter's room at her house and telling her neighbors about the permanent addition to her family. She'd even enrolled Jenny in the local school near her house, lying on the forms that she was the legal guardian. The emergency happened fast. My appendix burst and went septic. I'd called Rachel from the ambulance, barely conscious, asking her to pick up Jenny from daycare. Just for a few days, I'd gasped through the pain. Please, I need someone to watch her. Rachel had arrived at the hospital with adoption websites already bookmarked on her phone. She'd been trying to have kids for 6 years. 3 rounds of failed IVF had left her desperate. When I begged her to take care of Jenny, she saw it as the universe finally giving her what she deserved. Those 2 weeks I spent in the hospital, Rachel transformed into Jenny's mother. Not a temporary guardian, not a helpful relative. The mother. She introduced Jenny to everyone as her daughter. She threw out all of Jenny's clothes from my apartment and bought new ones. She told Jenny to call her mommy and that I was just Aunt Jessica, who'd been sick for so long that I couldn't take care of anyone anymore. She'd even hired a photographer for family portraits, just her husband Tom, and my daughter. When I was finally discharged, weak but recovering, I called Rachel to arrange picking up Jenny. Rachel didn't answer. She texted back saying Jenny was napping and shouldn't be disturbed. I'll bring her by tomorrow, she wrote. But tomorrow never came. Always an excuse. Jenny had a cold. Jenny was at a play date. Jenny was sleeping. After 3 days, I took an Uber to Rachel's house. She answered the door but wouldn't let me in. Jenny's finally adjusted to stability, she said, blocking the doorway. Moving her again would be traumatic. You're not thinking about what's best for her. I tried to push past her. She's my daughter. I'm taking her home. Tom appeared behind her. Actually, Jessica, we need to talk about that. Jenny's been with us for weeks now. She's enrolled in school here. She has friends. We've established residency. What are you talking about? I was in the hospital. You were babysitting. Rachel pulled out a folder. We've documented everything. 2 weeks of full-time care. Doctor appointments we took her to. School enrollment. She's established here now. Any court would see we're the stable option. You can't even stand without wobbling. How can you care for a 5-year-old? I called the police from their front porch. The officer who arrived looked bored until he heard the full story. Then he looked at Rachel. Ma'am, you're saying you won't return this woman's child? Rachel stood straighter. We're not kidding. We're keeping her. She's been abandoned for weeks. That constitutes custody transfer in emergencies. I've done the research. The officer raised an eyebrow. She was in the hospital. That's not abandonment. That's a medical emergency. Rachel pulled out printed papers. Look, I have documents. School enrollment, medical proxy forms, and even a notarized statement saying I'm the guardian. I looked at the notarized form. Rachel had forged my signature while I was unconscious. The date was from when I was literally in surgery. The officer called for backup and a social worker. While we waited, Rachel kept insisting she was protecting Jenny. From what? The officer asked. From an unstable situation. Jessica's a single mom. She works full-time. She got seriously ill. What happens next time? We're married, we own our home, and Tom has excellent insurance. We're the better option. The social worker arrived within an hour. Mrs. Franklin was a small woman with sharp eyes who'd seen everything. She looked at Rachel's folder of evidence, then at me, then back at Rachel. Mrs. Torres, you enrolled this child in school using what authority? Rachel smiled. Emergency custody rights. When a parent is incapacitated, responsible family members can make educational decisions. Mrs. Franklin nodded slowly. And this notarized guardian form? I had it prepared for Jessica's protection, in case something happened again. Mrs. Franklin examined the document. This is dated 2 weeks ago. The notary stamp is from Harold's office services, correct? Rachel nodded proudly. Yes, Tom's friend Harold helped us. Harold the notary? Mrs. Franklin pulled out her phone. The one whose license was revoked 6 months ago for fraudulent documentation? The color drained from Rachel's face. What? Harold never mentioned that. Mrs. Franklin made a call. I need immediate custody verification for a minor child. Possible attempted illegal guardianship transfer. Within minutes, she had the truth. Rachel had no legal standing, no court orders, no emergency custody, just forged documents and lies. Mrs. Franklin pulled out her phone and started photographing Rachel's folder of fake documents while speaking into a voice recorder. She instructed the officer to write down every word Rachel said about keeping Jenny, about establishing residency, about being the better parent. Rachel kept talking, apparently not understanding that everything coming out of her mouth was making things worse for her case. The social worker looked at me with something like pity mixed with professional concern. She explained that forged notarization wasn't just fraud, but could qualify as attempted kidnapping since Rachel used false documents to maintain custody of a child who wasn't hers. Rachel's face went from defensive to completely white in about 3 seconds. She started stammering that Harold told her the forms were legitimate, that she didn't know his license was revoked, that this was all a misunderstanding. Mrs. Franklin stopped her with one raised hand and said very clearly that ignorance of fraud doesn't make it legal, especially when the fraud involves a child. Tom finally spoke up from behind Rachel, his voice shaking as he asked what was going to happen now. Mrs. Franklin told him to step aside because she needed to go inside and see Jenny immediately. Rachel tried to block the doorway again, but the officer moved forward and told her to either let the social worker in or face additional charges for obstruction. Rachel stepped back and Mrs. Franklin walked past her into the house with me right behind her. Jenny was sitting on the couch in what used to be a guest room, but now looked like a kid's bedroom with pink walls and new furniture. She looked up when I came in and her face crumpled. She ran to me crying and saying "Mommy" over and over while I dropped to my knees and held her. My surgical incision pulled and hurt, but I didn't care because my daughter was in my arms, and she knew who I was despite whatever Rachel had been telling her. Jenny sobbed into my shoulder about how Rachel said I was too sick to be her mommy anymore, how Rachel said I had to stay at the hospital forever, how Rachel bought her new clothes because my clothes were old and worn out. I felt rage building in my chest as I realized Rachel hadn't just tried to keep Jenny physically, but had been working on her mind, trying to erase me and replace me with herself. Mrs. Franklin watched us for a moment, taking notes, then gently suggested that Jenny and I stay together while she talked to some other people. Rachel appeared in the doorway looking desperate and said Jenny was just confused, that she'd been calling her mommy for days without any problem. Mrs. Franklin turned to Rachel and said very quietly that lying to a 5-year-old about her mother constitutes psychological abuse, and that every word Rachel spoke was digging her hole deeper. Mrs. Franklin asked if there was somewhere private where she could talk to Jenny alone, and Rachel pointed toward the living room before I could object. The social worker assured me this was standard procedure, and that I could wait right outside where I'd be able to hear everything. She led Jenny by the hand into the other room while I stood in the kitchen doorway with my heart pounding. Through the open archway, I could see Jenny sitting on the couch next to Mrs. Franklin, looking small and scared. The social worker asked gentle questions about where Jenny had been sleeping, what Rachel had been telling her, whether anyone had hurt her or scared her. Jenny's voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear her explain that Mommy Rachel said I was going to live at the hospital forever because I was too sick. She said Rachel told her she had a new family now with a mommy and daddy who could take better care of her. She said Rachel threw away her favorite shirt because it had a stain and bought new clothes that Jenny didn't even like. Mrs. Franklin wrote everything down and asked if Jenny wanted to go home with me, and Jenny nodded so hard I thought her head might fall off. She said she wanted to go home to our apartment and sleep in her real bed and have me make her breakfast like always. Mrs. Franklin patted her hand and said that was going to happen very soon. The officer stepped into the kitchen where Tom was standing frozen and told him to get Rachel because they needed to have a conversation outside. Tom called for Rachel, who came out of the bedroom looking like she'd been crying. The officer asked her to step outside onto the porch and she went, probably thinking she could still talk her way out of this situation. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to Mrs. Franklin finish her interview with Jenny while watching through the window as the officer pulled out handcuffs. Rachel's voice rose to a near scream as she realized what was happening. The officer read her rights in a flat, bored tone while Rachel shouted that she was protecting Jenny from an unstable situation, that any judge would see she and Tom were the better option, that I was going to regret this. Tom stood on the porch looking like someone had hit him with a brick, not moving, not speaking, just staring at his wife in handcuffs. A backup police car pulled up and another officer got out to transport Rachel to the station. She kept screaming the whole way, saying over and over that she was Jenny's real mother now, that 2 weeks of care meant something, that the courts would understand. The second officer put her in the back of the patrol car and drove away, while the first officer came back inside to finish documenting the scene. Mrs. Franklin came out of the living room with Jenny holding her hand and told me she was going to drive us back to my apartment. She said we needed to get Jenny settled in her own home as quickly as possible to minimize additional trauma. She explained that an emergency custody hearing would happen within 72 hours, and that I needed to find a family lawyer immediately, because Rachel's claims about my fitness as a parent would need to be formally addressed in court. I felt panic rising in my chest because I had no idea how to find a lawyer or how I'd pay for one, but Mrs. Franklin said there were resources available and gave me a business card for legal aid services. She helped Jenny gather a few of her toys from the bedroom while I stood there trying to process everything that had just happened in the last 2 hours. Tom approached me in the kitchen and started to apologize, but I cut him off and told him to stay away from me and my daughter. He looked like he wanted to say more, but the officer stepped between us and suggested Tom might want to call his own lawyer because he could potentially face charges as an accessory to Rachel's fraud. Tom's face went pale and he sat down at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. Mrs. Franklin loaded Jenny's car seat into her vehicle, and we drove back to my apartment in silence, except for Jenny asking questions about whether we were really going home. I kept reassuring her while Mrs. Franklin navigated through evening traffic. When we got to my building, the social worker helped me carry Jenny upstairs and waited while I unlocked the door. My apartment looked exactly like I'd left it 3 weeks ago when the ambulance took me away, except dustier and with some mail piled up inside the door. Mrs. Franklin helped me get Jenny settled on the couch with her favorite blanket and some juice. She sat down across from me and went over everything that would happen next in a calm, matter-of-fact voice that somehow made the terror a little more manageable. The emergency hearing, the need for legal representation, the evaluation process that would determine if I was fit to have custody. She said Rachel's arrest record and the forged documents actually worked in my favor because they showed premeditation and deception rather than a family member trying to help during a crisis. She gave me her direct phone number and said to call immediately if Rachel or Tom tried to contact me or if anything else happened that seemed concerning. Then she left, and I was alone with Jenny in our apartment, trying to figure out what to do next. I waited until Jenny fell asleep on the couch around 9:30 before I let myself completely fall apart. I called my best friend Coraline, and the second she answered, I started crying so hard I could barely get words out. She kept asking what was wrong, and I tried to explain about Rachel and the forged documents and the police and the custody hearing, but it all came out in broken sentences between sobs. Coraline said she was coming over right now and hung up before I could tell her not to bother. She showed up 28 minutes later with her teenage daughter Isla, both of them carrying grocery bags. Coraline took one look at me and pulled me into a hug, while Isla went straight to the kitchen and started unpacking food into my refrigerator. My friend didn't ask questions or tell me everything would be okay. She just held me while I cried, and then made me sit down and eat something. Isla checked on Jenny, who was still sleeping, and covered her with an extra blanket. Coraline opened my fridge and saw it was basically empty, except for some old milk and condiments, so she sent Isla back down to their car to get more supplies. She made me tea and sat across from me at the kitchen table while I told her the whole story from the beginning, from my emergency surgery to Rachel's fake documents to the arrest that happened just hours ago. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said the first thing we needed to do was find me a lawyer. The next morning, Coraline showed up at 8 with coffee and her phone already out. She'd made a list of 5 family law offices and started calling while I got Jenny breakfast. The first 3 lawyers either didn't handle emergency custody cases or couldn't see me for at least a week. The 4th one was booked solid. The 5th one, a guy named Jeremy Callahan, asked Coraline to hold on and then came back and said he could see me that afternoon at 2 if I could make it to his office. Coraline said yes before I could even process the question. She told me not to worry about the money right now, that keeping Jenny safe was the only thing that mattered, and we'd figure out payment plans later. I felt guilty about adding more debt to the hospital bills I already couldn't afford, but Coraline grabbed my shoulders and said this wasn't the time to worry about money when my daughter's custody was at stake. Isla offered to watch Jenny during the appointment so I wouldn't have to bring her along and hear adult conversations about custody battles. I agreed because the last thing Jenny needed was more stress and confusion after everything Rachel had put her through. Jeremy Callahan's office was in a small building near the courthouse with worn carpet and outdated furniture that somehow made me feel better, because it meant he probably wasn't charging ridiculous rates. His secretary showed me into a conference room where Jeremy was waiting with a yellow legal pad and a recording device. He was maybe 50 with gray hair and tired eyes that suggested he'd seen every kind of family crisis possible. He asked me to start from the beginning and tell him everything, so I did, starting with my emergency surgery and ending with Rachel's arrest the night before. He took notes and occasionally stopped me to ask specific questions about dates and times and exact words people had said. When I finished, he sat back and looked at his notes for a long minute before speaking. He said Rachel's forged documents actually strengthened my case significantly because they demonstrated premeditation and deception rather than a confused family member trying to help. The fake notarization, the school enrollment with false information, the attempts to keep Jenny after I was discharged, all of it painted a picture of calculated fraud rather than emergency childcare. He asked about my job, my apartment, my support system, my relationship with Jenny before the surgery. I answered everything honestly, including the fact that I was a single mom who worked full-time and sometimes struggled to make ends meet. He said none of that made me unfit as long as I could show stable housing, adequate childcare arrangements, and genuine love for my daughter. He quoted me a fee that made my stomach drop, but then immediately said he'd reduce it by 40%, because this case made him angry both professionally and personally as a father himself. He said Rachel's actions were exactly the kind of predatory behavior that gave family law a bad name, and he wanted to make sure she didn't get away with it. 2 days later, I stood in family court feeling physically weak from surgery, but determined not to show it. Jeremy had coached me on what to expect and how to answer questions, but nothing really prepared me for seeing Rachel walk in dressed in a professional suit like she was attending a business meeting rather than a custody hearing for a child she'd tried to steal. She had her own lawyer, a woman in her 40s who looked expensive and competent. They sat at the opposite table and Rachel kept her eyes forward, not looking at me once. The judge was a tired-looking man in his 60s who'd probably seen 1,000 custody disputes and didn't have patience for nonsense. He reviewed the basic facts of the case, including Rachel's arrest record and the forged documents that Mrs. Franklin had submitted as evidence. Rachel's lawyer stood up and argued that I had been medically incapacitated for 2 weeks and unable to care for Jenny, that Rachel stepped in during a family emergency out of genuine concern, and that the forged documents were a misguided attempt to ensure Jenny could attend school rather than miss educational opportunities. She made it sound almost reasonable, like Rachel had just made some paperwork mistakes while trying to help. Jeremy stood up and his voice was sharp when he countered that forging legal documents wasn't a misguided mistake, but a calculated crime, that Rachel's arrest record spoke for itself, and that her attempts to keep Jenny even after I was discharged proved this was never about temporary emergency care, but about permanent custody transfer through fraud. The judge banged his gavel once and announced his decision. Jenny would remain with me as her legal guardian. Relief flooded through my body so fast I almost collapsed right there in the courtroom. But then he kept talking. He ordered a follow-up evaluation by a court-appointed child psychologist to assess any emotional harm from the situation. My relief turned cold. What if the psychologist found something wrong? What if Rachel's lies had damaged Jenny in ways I couldn't see yet? The judge scheduled the evaluation for 2 weeks out and dismissed us. Jeremy squeezed my shoulder and told me this was standard procedure, nothing to worry about. But I was worried. I spent the whole drive back to my apartment imagining what the psychologist might discover. Maybe Jenny would tell them she was happier at Rachel's house. Maybe she'd say she wanted to stay with Mommy Rachel. Maybe the evaluation would prove I really was unfit. That first night back home with Jenny felt strange. She seemed quiet, almost withdrawn. She ate her dinner without talking much. She played with her toys but kept glancing at me like she expected me to disappear. At bedtime, she asked if I was going to be here in the morning. I promised her I would be. She fell asleep holding my hand. 3 nights later, the nightmares started. I woke up to her crying at 2 in the morning. I ran to her room and found her sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face. She asked if I was going to disappear again. I climbed into bed with her and held her close. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. She sobbed into my chest and asked why Mommy Rachel said I didn't want her anymore. My heart broke hearing those words. I explained that Rachel had been confused and said things that weren't true. I told Jenny I loved her more than anything in the world. She cried herself back to sleep in my arms. The nightmares happened again the next night, and the night after that. Each time she woke up scared and asking the same questions. Each time I held her and reassured her. But I could see Rachel's poison working in my daughter's mind. Those 2 weeks had created fears that wouldn't heal quickly. The day of the evaluation with Dr. Marilyn Morrow arrived too fast. I drove Jenny to the psychologist's office feeling sick with worry. The waiting room had toys and children's books scattered around. Dr. Morrow came out to meet us. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm voice. She shook my hand and then knelt down to Jenny's level. She asked Jenny if she wanted to come play some games. Jenny looked at me for permission. I nodded and tried to smile. Dr. Morrow led Jenny into her office and closed the door. I sat in the waiting room for 45 minutes. Every minute felt like an hour. I picked up magazines but couldn't focus on the words. I watched the clock tick forward. I imagined what they were talking about in that room. Finally, the door opened. Dr. Morrow brought Jenny back out. Jenny ran to me and hugged my legs. Dr. Morrow asked if I could stay for a few minutes to talk. I asked the receptionist if Jenny could wait in the lobby. The receptionist pulled out some coloring books and crayons. Dr. Morrow led me back into her office. She sat behind her desk and opened a notebook. She explained that Jenny was showing signs of emotional confusion and attachment disruption. The words made my stomach drop. But then she said it was nothing that couldn't be addressed with appropriate therapy and stable routine. She said Jenny clearly loved me and identified me as her primary parent. The confusion came from Rachel's deliberate attempts to rewrite Jenny's understanding of our relationship. Dr. Morrow recommended weekly therapy sessions for Jenny. She said with time and consistency, Jenny would fully recover. I left her office feeling slightly better, but still worried about the road ahead. 3 weeks after getting Jenny back, I returned to work part-time. My boss had been understanding about the whole situation. She told me to take whatever time I needed, but I couldn't afford to take more time off. Medical bills from the emergency surgery were starting to arrive. The first one came in a white envelope with the hospital logo. I opened it at my kitchen table. The amount made me stop breathing. $42,000, even after insurance. I stared at the numbers trying to make sense of them. How was I supposed to pay this? I was already struggling with rent and daycare costs. Now I had legal fees on top of everything else. I sat there feeling the weight of it crushing down on me. In the next room, Jenny played with her toys, completely unaware that we were drowning in debt. At work, I could tell people were talking about me. I'd catch coworkers whispering and then going quiet when I walked by. My cubicle neighbor asked how I was doing in that careful voice people use when they don't know what to say. I told her I was fine, but I wasn't fine. I was exhausted and stressed and terrified about money. Every phone call from an unknown number made my heart race, thinking it might be another bill or a call from Rachel. The gossip at work added another layer of stress I didn't need. I heard someone in the break room saying they couldn't believe my cousin tried to steal my kid. Someone else said there had to be more to the story. I wanted to scream at them that there wasn't more to the story. Rachel was just crazy and desperate. But I stayed quiet and focused on my work. Rachel posted bail 2 days after her arrest. I found out because my aunt called me crying. She asked why I was pressing charges against Rachel when she was just trying to help. I tried to explain what really happened. I told her about the forged documents and the lies Rachel told Jenny. My aunt didn't want to hear it. She said Rachel had been devastated by her fertility problems. She said Rachel made some mistakes, but her heart was in the right place. I felt rage building in my chest. Rachel's heart wasn't in the right place. Rachel tried to steal my daughter. My aunt kept crying and saying I was tearing the family apart. She said I should drop the charges and let everyone move on. I told her I couldn't do that. Rachel committed crimes. She hurt Jenny. My aunt hung up on me. Over the next few days, more family members called with similar messages. My uncle said I was being vindictive. A cousin I barely knew sent me a long text about forgiveness. Another aunt left a voicemail saying Rachel was suffering enough already. I realized Rachel had been calling everyone with her version of events. She was telling them I abandoned Jenny during a medical crisis. She was painting herself as the hero who stepped in to help. She was making me look like an unfit mother who was punishing her for caring. The manipulation extended far beyond just Jenny. Rachel was poisoning my whole family against me. Jeremy told me to document everything. Every phone call from family members, every text message, every report about what Rachel was saying. He said we needed to establish a pattern of continued interference. So I started keeping a detailed log. I wrote down dates and times and exactly what was said. My aunt called on Tuesday at 3 p.m. saying I should be grateful Rachel took care of Jenny. My uncle texted on Wednesday morning with a long message about family loyalty. Rachel's best friend somehow got my number and called Thursday evening to tell me I was destroying a good person. I wrote it all down. With each entry, the pattern became clearer. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained campaign. Rachel had been planning to take Jenny from the beginning. The forged documents proved premeditation. The calls to family members proved she was still trying to control the narrative. Jeremy reviewed my log each week. He said this evidence would be crucial if Rachel tried to challenge the custody arrangement later. He said it showed her delusion, and manipulation weren't stopping just because she got arrested. The hospital billing statement sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I could bring myself to look at it again. $42,000. The number didn't get smaller no matter how many times I read it. I called the billing department to ask about payment plans. The woman on the phone was nice but firm. They could set up monthly payments, but the amount would still be over $500 a month. I did the math in my head. Rent, utilities, groceries, daycare, car insurance, phone bill, and now $500 for medical debt. Plus whatever Jeremy's final bill would be for the legal work. The numbers didn't add up. I made decent money at my job, but not enough to cover all of this. I sat at my kitchen table with my calculator and my bank statements spread out. I tried different scenarios. Cut back on groceries, cancel my phone plan, stop buying anything extra. Even with extreme cuts, I'd be barely making it each month. One unexpected expense would destroy everything. Jenny came into the kitchen asking for a snack. I got up and made her a peanut butter sandwich. She ate it at the table while I stared at the bills. She asked why I looked sad. I told her I was just thinking about grown-up stuff. She said she loved me. I hugged her tight and told her I loved her too. At least we had each other. Everything else we'd figure out somehow. Coraline showed up at my apartment 3 days later with a plan. She'd organized a meal train with neighbors and friends from work. Different people would bring dinner every night for the next month. I tried to protest. I told her I couldn't accept that much help. She told me to shut up and accept it. She said I was still recovering from major surgery and dealing with legal stress. She said letting people help wasn't weakness. That first week, 5 different families brought meals. Casseroles, pasta dishes, homemade soup. Each person dropped off the food and gave me a hug. Some of them knew the whole story. Others just knew I'd been sick and needed support. I felt grateful and embarrassed at the same time. Coraline's daughter Isla started coming over twice a week to play with Jenny. She was 16 and saving money for college. I paid her $20 each time. It wasn't much, but it was what I could afford. Having Isla there meant I could take phone calls with attorneys and insurance companies without Jenny overhearing stressful conversations. I could sit in my bedroom and argue with the hospital billing department while Jenny and Isla played games in the living room. Coraline had basically organized my entire support system. I didn't know how to thank her. She said I'd do the same for her. I promised myself I would. Jeremy called to tell me Rachel's criminal case was moving forward. The prosecutor had set a court date for the fraudulent document charges. They wanted to discuss my potential testimony. Jeremy explained this was separate from the family court custody issues, but it would likely influence the judge's perception of Rachel's character and intentions. The prosecutor wanted me to testify about discovering the forged guardianship papers, about Rachel's refusal to return Jenny after I was discharged, about the lies Rachel told to the school officials and neighbors. Jeremy said my testimony would be crucial to proving premeditation. Rachel's attorney would argue it was all a misunderstanding, that Rachel panicked during a family emergency and made poor decisions. But the evidence showed otherwise. The internet searches about custody laws, the forged notary stamp, the school enrollment with false information, all of it pointed to a calculated plan. I agreed to testify. Part of me was terrified to face Rachel in court again, but another part of me wanted her to face real consequences. She'd tried to steal my daughter. She'd traumatized Jenny with lies. She deserved whatever punishment the court decided. Dr. Morrow called with her recommendation after Jenny's third evaluation session. She said Jenny needed to start weekly play therapy to process her confusion about the situation. She'd already found a therapist who specialized in helping young children understand family disruption. The therapist's name was on a referral sheet Dr. Morrow emailed me. I looked up the cost. $120 per session. My insurance would cover 60% after I met my deductible, which I hadn't met yet because of the surgery. So the first several sessions would be full price. I did the math again. Almost $500 a month just for Jenny's therapy, on top of everything else. But I agreed immediately. Jenny needed help processing what Rachel had done to her. The nightmares were getting worse, not better. She was having trouble sleeping. She asked constant questions about whether I was leaving. The therapist could help her work through these fears in ways I couldn't. Dr. Morrow said the therapist used play-based techniques. Jenny wouldn't have to talk directly about her feelings. She could express them through dolls and games. Dr. Morrow emphasized that the therapist specialized in making sure young children didn't feel responsible for adult conflicts. That was important. I didn't want Jenny thinking any of this was her fault. I scheduled the first appointment for the following week. Another bill to add to the pile. But Jenny's mental health was worth any cost. The next morning, Jeremy called with news that made my stomach drop. Tom had sent him a message through his own lawyer, requesting a private meeting with me. Jeremy read Tom's words carefully over the phone. He said Tom wanted to apologize in person and explain things from his side. He claimed he never wanted the situation to go this far and was struggling with what Rachel had done. Jeremy's voice was firm when he gave his advice. He told me not to meet with Tom under any circumstances. It could complicate the legal case and Rachel's attorney might try to use anything I said against me in court. But Tom's message kept running through my head all day. The part about struggling with Rachel's actions stuck with me. I wondered if their marriage was falling apart because of what she'd tried to do. Part of me felt bad for Tom, but mostly I just felt angry that he'd gone along with Rachel's plan in the first place. That night, I tucked Jenny into bed at her usual time. She snuggled under her blankets with her favorite stuffed rabbit, looking small and tired. I was about to turn off her lamp when she asked me a question that made my chest hurt. She wanted to know why Rachel told her I didn't want to be her mommy anymore. Her voice was so quiet and confused. I sat down on the edge of her bed and tried to figure out how to explain something so awful to a 5-year-old. I told her that Rachel had been confused and said things that weren't true. I promised her that I always wanted to be her mommy and always would. Nothing would ever change that. Jenny's face scrunched up while she thought about my words. I could see her trying to understand how the aunt she'd trusted could lie about something so big and important. She asked if Rachel was still confused. I said Rachel had made bad choices, but that didn't mean Jenny did anything wrong. We talked for almost 20 minutes, with Jenny asking more questions about why adults sometimes lie and whether Rachel was still her aunt. I tried to answer everything honestly while keeping it simple enough for her to understand. When she finally fell asleep, I sat in her doorway for a long time watching her breathe. 3 days later, I got a phone call from someone at the State Notary Investigation Board. The woman explained they were looking into Rachel's use of the fake notary stamp. She said Harold was facing serious trouble for what he'd done. They needed me to give official testimony about the timeline and what happened. She asked when I could come to their office downtown to make a statement. I looked at my calendar and felt overwhelmed by everything already scheduled. Work shifts, Jenny's therapy appointments, meetings with Jeremy, and now this. But I agreed to come in the following Tuesday afternoon. The investigation board office was in a gray building near the courthouse. I had to take time off work and arrange for Coraline to pick up Jenny from daycare. The investigator asked me detailed questions about when I first saw the forged document and what the date on it said. She wanted to know exactly when I was in surgery and whether I could have possibly signed anything that day. I explained I was unconscious on an operating table when the document claimed I'd signed it. She took notes on everything and said my testimony would be crucial for their case against Harold. The whole meeting took almost 2 hours. My follow-up appointment with my surgeon happened on Thursday morning. She examined my incision site and pressed on my abdomen to check for any problems. Everything looked good, and she said I was cleared for full activity. But then she warned me the infection had been serious enough that I needed to watch for any symptoms coming back. Fever, pain, or unusual tiredness should send me straight to the emergency room. Before I left, she suggested something I wasn't expecting. She said she explained that medical trauma combined with family crisis creates lasting stress that needs professional help. I thanked her but didn't commit to anything. I was already paying for Jenny's therapy and could barely afford that. The following Monday, I was at work when my phone rang with a call from Jenny's daycare. The director's voice sounded tense when she told me Rachel had just shown up trying to pick up Jenny. My heart started pounding so hard I thought everyone in the office could hear it. The director explained that Rachel claimed she was still on the authorized pickup list from when she had temporary care. But the director had refused to release Jenny and told Rachel to leave immediately. Rachel had argued for several minutes before finally getting back in her car. I left work right away and drove to the daycare, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got there, Jenny was playing in the classroom like nothing had happened. The director showed me the sign-in sheet where Rachel had written her name before being turned away. I thanked her for protecting Jenny and promised to update all the paperwork to make sure Rachel's name was completely removed. That evening, I called Jeremy and told him what happened. He was quiet for a moment, then said this changed things. He was going to file for a restraining order immediately to create formal legal boundaries. He explained the daycare incident showed Rachel wasn't respecting the custody decision and posed a real threat. The restraining order hearing got scheduled quickly because of Rachel's attempted pickup. Jeremy said judges take these situations seriously when children are involved. We met at the courthouse early on a Wednesday morning. Rachel was there with her attorney, looking calm and professional in a navy dress. The judge was a middle-aged woman with gray hair who looked tired. Jeremy presented evidence of Rachel's pattern of behavior. The forged documents, her refusal to return Jenny initially, and now the unauthorized daycare pickup attempt. He argued that Rachel needed clear legal boundaries to protect Jenny and me. Rachel's attorney stood up and said the restraining order was excessive. He claimed Rachel had simply made a mistake about the pickup authorization and meant no harm. She was just a concerned family member who cared about her niece. But the judge looked through all the documentation Jeremy had filed. She asked Rachel's attorney to explain the forged notary stamp and the lies Rachel told to the school officials. The attorney didn't have good answers. The judge granted a temporary restraining order right there in the courtroom. Rachel couldn't contact Jenny or come within 500 feet of my home, Jenny's daycare, or my workplace. The order would stay in effect until a full hearing could be scheduled. Rachel's face went red and she started to stand up, but her attorney put his hand on her arm. After the hearing, my phone started ringing with calls from family members. My aunt called first, her voice upset and angry. She said I was being cruel to Rachel, who had only tried to help during a crisis. She couldn't understand why I was getting restraining orders and pressing charges against family. My uncle called an hour later saying basically the same thing. They both thought Rachel had made mistakes but didn't deserve to be treated like a criminal. Then my mother called from 3 states away. She was furious that I hadn't contacted her during the emergency surgery. She wanted to know why Rachel had been my first call instead of her. I tried to explain that everything happened so fast and I was barely conscious in the ambulance. I never imagined Rachel would try to keep Jenny permanently. My mother said she would have flown out immediately if she'd known. The conversation left me feeling guilty and exhausted. 2 days later, Jeremy called about discovery documents he'd received from Rachel's attorney. They included character witness statements from Rachel's friends and neighbors. Jeremy read some of them to me over the phone. Everyone described Rachel as loving, kind, and someone who would make an excellent mother. They talked about how much she wanted children and how devoted she was to family. One neighbor wrote about seeing Rachel with Jenny during those 2 weeks, and how natural they looked together. Jeremy said we needed to prepare counter-statements from my own support network. He wanted written statements from Coraline, my boss, Jenny's daycare teachers, and my neighbor who had known us for 3 years. Anyone who could speak to my relationship with Jenny and my abilities as a mother. I spent the weekend reaching out to people and asking them to write statements. It felt strange having to prove I was a good parent to my own daughter. Jenny's play therapist called me after the 4th session to give an update. She said Jenny was making positive progress. She was starting to express her confusion through play scenarios with dolls that represented family members. The therapist set up situations where the dolls had to work through problems, and Jenny acted out different solutions. The therapist emphasized this was healthy processing. Jenny was working through her feelings in a safe way. But she recommended continuing weekly sessions for at least 3 more months to make sure Jenny fully processed everything. I agreed immediately, even though the cost made my budget even tighter. The next afternoon, Jeremy called with information that made me feel sick. Police had obtained Rachel's internet search history during their investigation. It showed Rachel had been researching emergency custody laws and parental unfitness criteria for at least 2 months before my surgery. 2 months. That meant Rachel had been planning this scenario long before any actual emergency happened. She'd been waiting for an opportunity to take Jenny. Jeremy explained this would be powerful evidence in court because it proved premeditation. Rachel hadn't just panicked during a crisis. She'd been preparing for months to take my daughter away from me. I sat down on my kitchen floor after hanging up the phone. My hands were shaking and I felt like I might throw up. Rachel had been planning to steal Jenny before I even got sick. She'd been researching how to make me look unfit as a mother. She'd been preparing legal arguments and gathering information about custody transfers, all while pretending to be my supportive cousin. All while I trusted her completely with my daughter. I couldn't shake the knowledge that Rachel had been preparing this for months. The next week, Jeremy called with news about the prosecutor's office. They were offering Rachel a plea deal: 2 years probation, mandatory counseling, community service, and she'd have to admit guilt for the forged documents on record. Jeremy explained this over the phone while I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee. The plea deal would help your custody case significantly. It creates a formal record of her deception. A conviction without trial means less time, less stress, less money spent on legal proceedings. But I wanted her to face harsher consequences. I wanted a jury to hear what she'd done. Jeremy seemed to read my mind through the phone. I understand that impulse, Jessica. But think about what's best for Jenny. Quick resolution means less disruption to her routine. Less time you're tied up in court. Less money spent on legal fees. I agreed to the plea deal even though part of me wanted Rachel to suffer more for what she'd tried to do to my daughter. 3 days later, Jeremy called again. Rachel rejected the plea deal. She's insisting on going to trial. Her attorney tried to talk her out of it based on the evidence, but Rachel seems convinced a jury will understand she was acting in Jenny's best interests. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rachel still thought she was the victim in this situation. Still thought she'd done nothing wrong by trying to steal my daughter. Jeremy sounded tired when he continued. Her attorney seemed frustrated during the hearing. The evidence against her is overwhelming. The forged documents, the fraudulent notary, the internet search history showing premeditation. But Rachel apparently believes a jury will see her as a loving aunt who stepped in during a crisis. She's completely delusional about her position. We need to prepare for trial now. This will take longer and cost more, but at least we'll get that formal conviction on record. 6 weeks after the initial incident at Rachel's house, I heard through my aunt that Tom had filed for separation. My aunt called me one evening after Jenny went to bed, her voice careful and uncertain. Tom moved into an apartment last week. He's attending therapy. The family is talking about how he's finally seeing what Rachel did. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt vindicated that even Tom was admitting Rachel had gone too far. When I told Jeremy about Tom's separation during our next meeting, he leaned forward in his chair. Tom might be willing to testify about Rachel's premeditation, about her obsessive behavior regarding Jenny. If he's in therapy and processing what happened, he might be ready to tell the truth about what he witnessed. Do you want me to reach out to his attorney? I nodded immediately. Anything that strengthens our case. 2 weeks later, Jeremy called with an update about Dr. Morrow's evaluation. She completed her full assessment of Jenny and submitted her report to family court. Jeremy read sections of it to me over the phone. Dr. Morrow concludes that Jenny has a secure attachment to you as her primary parent. The 2-week disruption caused temporary confusion, but no permanent damage. She's recommending continued therapy but states clearly that Jenny knows you're her mother. The report also strongly advises against any contact between Jenny and Rachel until Rachel receives extensive psychological treatment. I felt relief wash over me hearing those words. Dr. Morrow's professional opinion carried weight in family court. Her report would make it harder for Rachel to argue she should have any role in Jenny's life. That evening, I took Jenny to Coraline's house for dinner like we did most Wednesdays. Isla played with Jenny in the living room while Coraline and I sat in her kitchen. After Jenny fell asleep on Coraline's couch, I finally broke down. The tears came suddenly, and I couldn't stop them. I'm so exhausted, Coraline. Work, therapy appointments, legal proceedings, trying to keep everything normal for Jenny. I feel like I'm drowning. Coraline moved her chair closer and put her arm around my shoulders. You're doing an incredible job under impossible circumstances. Look at Jenny in there, sleeping peacefully. She feels safe because you fought for her. You've kept her world stable even while yours was falling apart. Asking for help isn't weakness, Jessica. It's wisdom. You've been asking for help from me, from Jeremy, from Jenny's therapist. That's what strong parents do. I wiped my eyes and looked at Jenny sleeping on the couch, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. The following Monday, I met with someone from the hospital billing department about my medical debt. The woman, a financial counselor named Millie, reviewed my file on her computer. Your surgery and 2-week stay totaled $42,000 after insurance. That's a significant amount, but we can establish a payment plan based on your income. She typed numbers into her computer and showed me the screen. Based on your single-parent status and income level, we can reduce your monthly obligation to $300. You might also qualify for additional assistance programs given the emergency nature of your surgery. I signed the payment plan paperwork feeling like I could finally breathe. $300 a month was manageable. Not easy, but possible. Rachel's trial began on a cold morning in late October. I had to testify about the timeline of events and my discovery of the forged guardianship papers. Walking into the courtroom felt surreal. Rachel sat at the defense table in a navy blue suit, her hair pulled back, looking calm and professional. She didn't look at me as I walked to the witness stand. The prosecutor, a woman in her 40s with short gray hair, asked me to describe what happened when I was discharged from the hospital. I explained the phone calls, the excuses, the Uber ride to Rachel's house. I described finding the forged notarization form and realizing the date was from when I was literally in surgery. Rachel maintained a calm expression the entire time I testified, like she was listening to someone describe the weather instead of her attempt to steal my daughter through calculated deception. When the prosecutor finished her questions, Rachel's attorney stood up. A man in his 50s with a tired expression. He asked if Rachel had taken good care of Jenny during the 2 weeks. Yes, I answered. But that doesn't give her the right to forge documents and try to keep my daughter permanently. The next day of trial, the prosecution presented evidence of Rachel's internet searches. The prosecutor displayed screenshots on a large monitor for the jury. These searches were conducted on Rachel's home computer over a 2-month period before Jessica's surgery. Search terms included emergency custody laws, proving parental unfitness, temporary guardian rights, and how long before custody transfers. The prosecutor pointed to the dates. This shows clear premeditation. Rachel Torres wasn't responding to an emergency. She was waiting for an opportunity. Rachel's attorney objected, arguing that the searches showed responsible preparation for helping family during a potential emergency. But I watched the jury's faces as they looked at the screen. Their expressions showed skepticism. One woman in the front row shook her head slightly. The prosecution also presented evidence of Rachel's purchase of school enrollment forms 3 weeks before my surgery. She bought these forms and had them ready. She'd been planning exactly how to establish Jenny in her household before any emergency occurred. On the 3rd day of trial, Tom testified for the prosecution. He walked to the witness stand looking thinner than I remembered, his suit hanging loose on his frame. The prosecutor asked him about Rachel's behavior regarding children and fertility struggles. Tom's voice was quiet but clear. Rachel became increasingly obsessed with having children after our 3rd failed IVF. She talked constantly about friends who had kids, about feeling left behind, about how unfair it was. When Jessica called from the ambulance asking Rachel to pick up Jenny, Rachel said this was finally our chance to be parents. I asked what she meant, and she said Jessica was too sick to take care of Jenny properly anymore. The prosecutor asked Tom to describe Rachel's actions during the 2 weeks I was hospitalized. Tom looked down at his hands. She immediately started redecorating the spare bedroom for Jenny. She told neighbors Jenny was our daughter. She researched custody laws every night after Jenny went to bed. When I suggested we should prepare to return Jenny when Jessica recovered, Rachel got angry. She said Jessica had proven she couldn't handle single parenthood, and that we were the better option. I watched Rachel's face crumble as her husband confirmed everything the prosecution had been arguing. Her calm expression finally broke and tears ran down her cheeks. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, the 4 women stood and read the verdict. We find the defendant Rachel Torres guilty of filing false documents. We find the defendant Rachel Torres guilty of attempted custodial interference. The judge thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing, Rachel received 2 years probation, mandatory psychological counseling twice a month, and 200 hours of community service. The judge also extended the existing restraining order for 5 years. Rachel Torres, you engaged in a calculated plan to separate a mother from her child, using fraudulent documents and deception. Your actions caused significant harm to a 5-year-old child and her mother. This sentence reflects both the seriousness of your crimes and an opportunity for you to receive the psychological help you clearly need. Rachel stood beside her attorney, crying silently as the judge spoke. I sat in the gallery with Jeremy, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. It was over. Rachel had been convicted. The restraining order would keep her away from Jenny. But watching her cry at the defense table, I couldn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. Jeremy filed the motion 2 days after sentencing. I sat in his office while he explained the legal strategy, watching him type formal language about terminating custody claims and protecting Jenny from harmful contact. The motion cited Rachel's conviction, the forged documents, and every piece of evidence we'd gathered over 3 months. Jeremy printed the pages and slid them across his desk for my signature. This formally closes the door on any future attempts, he said. The judge will review everything at the final hearing. I signed each page, my hand steadier than I expected. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, giving the court time to review all documentation. Walking out of Jeremy's office that afternoon, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly, but the beginning of it. Like I could finally see the finish line after running a marathon I never chose to enter. Jenny's therapy session the following week brought the breakthrough her therapist had been working toward. I waited in the reception area like always, flipping through magazines without reading them. The session ran longer than usual. When the door finally opened, Jenny's face was red and blotchy from crying, but her therapist looked satisfied. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked me. Jenny went to the play corner while the therapist pulled me aside. She expressed anger today, real anger at Rachel for lying to her. That's huge progress. She's been internalizing everything, blaming herself for the confusion. Today, she finally directed those feelings where they belong. I watched Jenny arranging toy figures in the corner, her movements deliberate and focused. The therapist continued. This emotional honesty is exactly what we've been working toward. She's processing the betrayal in a healthy way now instead of turning it inward. Keep reinforcing that none of this was her fault, and that being angry at someone who hurt you is okay. I nodded, throat tight. On the drive home, Jenny was quiet until we stopped at a red light. Mommy Rachel was mean to me, she said suddenly. She told me you didn't want to be my mommy anymore. That was a lie. I reached back and squeezed her hand. That was a very big lie, sweetie. I'm so proud of you for being brave and talking about your feelings. She went back to looking out the window, but her shoulders seemed lighter somehow. My mother called 3 days later saying she'd booked a flight. I'm coming to see you and Jenny, she announced. I need to understand what really happened with Rachel. Her tone carried that skeptical edge I'd heard since this whole nightmare began. Rachel always seemed so sincere when we talked at family gatherings. I felt my jaw tighten. Mom, I've told you everything. Rachel forged documents and tried to keep Jenny. She was convicted in court. I know what you said, my mother replied. But I need to see for myself. She arrived on a Tuesday evening, hugging Jenny first, and then me. Over the next 3 days, she watched how Jenny interacted with me, asked careful questions about bedtime routines and school, and spent an afternoon reviewing all the legal documents Jeremy had provided. The forged signature, the fraudulent notarization, the school enrollment forms with false information, Rachel's conviction paperwork. On her 4th day visiting, my mother sat at my kitchen table after Jenny went to bed. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I didn't understand how calculated this was. I thought maybe there was confusion or miscommunication, but this was deliberate. She planned to take your daughter. I felt years of tension release from my shoulders. Thank you for saying that. She reached across the table and took my hand. I'm going to help with the legal fees. You shouldn't be carrying this financial burden alone. Let me write you a check before I leave. Rachel's attorney contacted Jeremy during my mother's visit. Jeremy called me that evening after she'd gone to bed. Rachel wants to write an apology letter to you and Jenny as part of her court-mandated counseling. Her therapist thinks it would help her rehabilitation process. I sat down hard on my couch. What do you think I should do? Jeremy's voice was firm. You're under no obligation to engage with Rachel's rehabilitation. That's for her benefit, not yours or Jenny's. If you accept the letter, you're opening a door that might be better left closed. Think about what serves Jenny's well-being, not what makes Rachel feel better about her actions. I thought about Jenny's breakthrough in therapy, how she'd finally expressed her anger and started healing. A letter from Rachel could undo that progress or confuse her all over again. I don't want the letter, I told Jeremy. Tell her attorney we decline. This is for Rachel's benefit, not ours. We're focused on Jenny's healing, not Rachel's redemption. Jeremy agreed immediately. I'll send the response tomorrow. You made the right choice. Family members started reaching out over the next 2 weeks. First, my aunt, Rachel's mother, called crying. Tom told me everything about Rachel's mental health struggles. I didn't know how bad things had gotten with the fertility issues. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you at first. Then my uncle called with a similar apology. We saw the court documents Tom shared. Rachel was planning this for months. That's not the niece I thought I knew. My cousin on my father's side sent a long email explaining how Rachel had manipulated her version of events to make me look unstable, and her look like a rescuer. I believed her because she seemed so genuine. I should have asked for your side before taking a position. The apologies kept coming. Each one felt validating but also exhausting. These people had doubted me when I needed support most. Now they were sorry because the evidence was undeniable. I accepted their apologies but kept my distance emotionally. Some relationships don't fully recover from betrayal, even secondhand betrayal. Tom's name came up in several of these conversations. He was being very open about Rachel's obsession with having children and his regret for not stopping her earlier. My aunt mentioned he'd moved out and filed for divorce. He told me he should have put his foot down when Rachel started talking about keeping Jenny permanently, my aunt said. He feels terrible about everything. The final custody hearing arrived 3 months after that night on Rachel's porch, when Officer Lawson first documented everything. Jeremy had prepared a comprehensive presentation of evidence. My fitness as a parent before the medical emergency. Witness statements from Coraline, my boss, Jenny's daycare teachers, and my neighbor Bonnie. Dr. Morrow's evaluation showing Jenny's secure attachment to me. Rachel's criminal conviction and the evidence of premeditation. The forged documents and fraudulent notarization. Everything laid out in organized folders with tabs and highlighted sections. We arrived at the courthouse early. Jeremy reviewed our strategy one more time in the hallway. The judge has all the documentation already. This hearing is mostly procedural, but she'll want to hear from you directly about your parenting and Jenny's current well-being. Just be honest and straightforward like you've been throughout this process. Rachel sat at the other table with her attorney, looking smaller than I remembered. She didn't make eye contact when I entered. The judge reviewed the materials silently for several minutes before looking up. Ms. Torres, I've read everything submitted by your attorney. Tell me about Jenny's current situation. Doctor, I described our daily routine, how Jenny was thriving in kindergarten, her therapy progress and the reduction in nightmares, our support system with Coraline and my mother, my stable job and the promotion I'd received. The judge listened carefully, occasionally making notes. She asked about my health recovery and my plans for emergency childcare if another medical situation arose. I explained the backup systems I'd established with Coraline and my mother, the emergency contact forms at Jenny's school, and the medical power of attorney I'd properly executed with Jeremy's help. The judge turned to Rachel's attorney. Does your client wish to make a statement? Rachel's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client recognizes she made serious mistakes driven by desperation and untreated mental health issues related to infertility trauma. She's completed her court-mandated counseling and takes full responsibility for her actions. She's not contesting Ms. Torres' fitness as a parent or requesting any custody considerations. We're simply asking the court to consider that my client's actions, while wrong, came from a place of wanting to provide a stable home for a child she genuinely cared for. The judge's expression didn't change. She looked at Rachel directly. Ms. Torres, do you understand the harm you caused this child and her mother? Rachel nodded, tears running down her face. Yes, Your Honor. I made terrible choices. I let my desperation override my judgment and my respect for Jessica's role as Jenny's mother. The judge made more notes. Then she looked at me. Ms. Torres, I'm terminating any potential custody claims from Rachel Torres. You are formally recognized as Jenny's sole legal guardian with full parental rights. The existing restraining order will remain in effect until Jenny turns 18. I'm also ordering that any future contact between Rachel Torres and the minor child Jenny Torres requires prior court approval and professional supervision. She paused, looking between me and Rachel. Ms. Torres, you handled an impossible situation with remarkable grace. You prioritized your daughter's therapeutic needs throughout this process and demonstrated exactly the kind of stable, loving parenting that children need. This court finds no basis whatsoever for questioning your fitness as a parent. Walking out of the courthouse with Jeremy felt surreal. The weight I'd been carrying for 3 months lifted so suddenly I felt dizzy. Rachel can never legally threaten your relationship with Jenny again, Jeremy said. The restraining order and custody termination are both permanent until Jenny is 18. If Rachel violates either one, she faces immediate criminal charges. We pushed through the courthouse doors into bright sunlight. Coraline was waiting on the steps with Jenny, who was eating a snack and swinging her legs. Jenny saw me and jumped up. Mama, did you finish your meeting? Can we get ice cream now? I scooped her up, holding her tight. Yes, baby. We can definitely get ice cream. She had no idea what had just happened in that courtroom. No concept of custody hearings or restraining orders or the legal significance of the judge's ruling. She just knew we were together and going for ice cream. That innocence felt precious. Coraline met my eyes over Jenny's head and smiled. I nodded, unable to speak past the emotion in my throat. Jeremy shook my hand. Call me if you need anything, but I think we're done here. You did great. He walked back toward his car while Coraline, Jenny, and I headed to the ice cream shop 3 blocks away. Jenny's therapist called the following week to schedule what she called a progress review. When I arrived for the appointment without Jenny, the therapist smiled. Jenny's made significant progress in processing the disruption. Her nightmares have stopped completely. She's expressing normal emotions for her age and development. Her attachment to you is secure and healthy. I'm recommending we reduce sessions to twice monthly instead of weekly. I felt relief wash through me. So she's okay? The therapist nodded. She's more than okay. She's shown remarkable resilience. That's a testament to your consistent parenting and the support system you've maintained for her. We'll continue twice monthly sessions for the next few months to monitor her progress, but I expect we'll be able to phase out therapy entirely by summer. She paused. I do want to emphasize that Jenny may need additional support during major transitions or stressful periods. Starting a new school, moving to a new home, things like that. But overall, she's processed this experience in the healthiest way possible for a child her age. Keep doing what you're doing. You're giving her exactly what she needs. I started attending a support group for single parents dealing with custody disputes the next month. Coraline had found the group online and suggested I try it. The first meeting was in a church basement with folding chairs arranged in a circle. 8 other parents sat around sharing stories that sounded impossibly familiar. Fighting ex-partners over visitation, dealing with family members who questioned their parenting, managing legal fees and therapy costs while working full-time. trying to shield their kids from adult conflicts. A woman named Sarah talked about her sister trying to get custody of her son by claiming Sarah's work schedule made her neglectful. Another parent described his ex-wife's parents filing for grandparent rights and dragging him through months of court battles. Everyone nodded in understanding. When it was my turn, I shared the basics of what happened with Rachel. The attempted permanent custody, the forged documents, the 3-month legal battle. People around the circle made sympathetic noises. "That's nightmare fuel," one father said. "I'm glad you got your daughter back." The group helped me process feelings I couldn't share with Jenny, lingering anger at Rachel for putting us through this trauma. Anxiety about future challenges even though the legal case was closed. Guilt about the financial stress and time away from Jenny that the custody battle required. The facilitator reminded us that these feelings were normal. You fought for your children. That takes enormous strength, but it also leaves scars. Give yourself permission to heal too. I attended the next support group meeting the following week and shared that the legal case was finally closed. The facilitator smiled and asked how I felt about that milestone. "Relief mostly," I said, "but also weird, like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop even though I know it won't." Several people nodded in understanding. "That hypervigilance is normal after what you've been through," the facilitator explained. "It takes time for your nervous system to catch up with your legal reality. Give yourself permission to feel safe again." A few days later, my boss called me into her office and I felt that familiar anxiety spike, worried something was wrong. Instead, she smiled and gestured for me to sit down. "Jessica, I wanted to talk to you about a new position that's opening up. It's a promotion to senior coordinator with better hours and a significant pay increase." I stared at her, not quite processing the words. "The management team has been impressed with your professionalism during everything you've dealt with these past few months," she continued. "You've never missed a deadline. You've maintained excellent work quality, and you've handled an impossible personal situation with grace. We think you'd be perfect for this role. The position would mean fewer late shifts, which I know would help with childcare, and the salary increase is about 20%. I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you," I managed to say. "This timing is incredible. I really need this." She handed me the formal job description and salary details. "Take a few days to review everything and let me know if you're interested, but I hope you'll accept because you've earned this opportunity." Walking back to my desk, I felt something shift inside me. The universe was finally giving me a break after months of struggle. The increased income would help me pay down medical bills and legal fees so much faster. I called Coraline during my lunch break to share the news, and she actually screamed with excitement. "That's amazing," she said. "See, good things do happen to good people eventually. You deserve this so much." 2 weeks later, Jeremy called to tell me that Rachel's therapist had sent a formal letter through legal channels. "Rachel is requesting supervised contact with Jenny as part of her treatment plan," he explained. "Her therapist believes it would help with Rachel's rehabilitation process." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you think I should do?" Jeremy was quiet for a moment. "Legally, you have no obligation to agree to this. The restraining order is still in effect, and you have sole custody, but I think you should talk to Marilyn about it from Jenny's perspective." I called Marilyn that afternoon and explained the situation. She listened carefully, and then asked how Jenny had been doing recently. "Really well," I said. "The nightmares stopped weeks ago. She's happy and settled. She barely mentions Rachel anymore." "Then my professional opinion is that contact with Rachel right now would disrupt Jenny's progress," Marilyn said firmly. "Jenny has successfully processed the disruption and moved forward. Reintroducing Rachel, even in a supervised setting, could undo that healing and create new confusion. Your priority has to be Jenny's well-being, not Rachel's rehabilitation needs." I called Jeremy back and told him to decline the request through official channels. He drafted a response citing Marilyn's professional recommendation and emphasizing that my decision was based on protecting Jenny's mental health. Rachel's therapist acknowledged the response but requested we keep the option open for future consideration. "Not happening," I told Jeremy. "Jenny's stability comes first, always." The weeks passed, and I noticed Jenny asking fewer questions about Rachel during our bedtime conversations. One night she mentioned that her friend at daycare had an aunt who brought cookies, and Jenny said it reminded her of when Aunt Rachel used to bake. But she said it matter-of-factly, without the emotional confusion that used to accompany any mention of Rachel. "I'm glad you have happy memories of baking," I said carefully. "Aunt Rachel made some bad choices, and that's why she can't be part of our lives right now. But it's okay to remember the good times too." Jenny nodded and then immediately changed the subject to ask if we could get pizza for dinner on Friday. Her focus had shifted back to normal 5-year-old concerns, like what her friends were doing at daycare, which episodes of her favorite show she wanted to watch, and planning her upcoming birthday party. The transition felt like a weight lifting. My daughter was healing and moving forward. I met with the hospital billing department to finalize my medical debt payment plan the following month. The financial counselor reviewed my income and expenses and helped me set up automatic monthly payments I could actually afford. This gives you a clear path forward, she explained. You'll have everything paid off in about 3 years at this rate. She also pulled up several assistance programs I might qualify for, given my single-parent status and the emergency nature of the surgery. Let me submit applications for you, she said. These programs can sometimes reduce the total debt significantly. 2 weeks later, she called to tell me I'd been approved for additional assistance that reduced my total debt by 30%. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the revised statement, hardly believing the number had dropped so dramatically. The financial chaos that the emergency surgery created finally felt manageable, like I had real control over my situation instead of drowning in bills. I started making my first regular payment the next week, and it felt like taking back power over my life. Around the same time, my aunt called to say that Tom had been asking mutual family members about the best way to reach out to me. He wants to apologize directly, she explained, and he mentioned wanting to help with Jenny's therapy costs. He feels terrible about his role in what happened. I told her I needed to think about it and discuss it with Jeremy. When I called Jeremy, he was cautious but pragmatic. If Tom genuinely wants to help with therapy costs, that does benefit Jenny directly, he said. But I'd recommend keeping very clear boundaries. Accept financial help if offered, but don't open the door to ongoing contact or involvement. He can send checks through me if that makes you more comfortable. I agreed to that arrangement and told my aunt that Tom could reach out through Jeremy's office. A week later, Jeremy called to say Tom had sent a substantial check specifically designated for Jenny's therapy expenses, along with a letter apologizing for not stopping Rachel earlier. The money genuinely helped, covering several months of therapy sessions, and I accepted it because it benefited Jenny. But I maintained strict boundaries, communicating only through Jeremy and making clear this didn't change anything about our lack of relationship. 6 months after the initial incident, Jenny's therapist scheduled what she called a final evaluation session. I arrived nervous, worried about what the assessment might reveal, but the therapist smiled warmly as she reviewed her notes. Jenny has successfully processed the disruption, she said. She's showing age-appropriate emotional regulation, secure attachment to you, and no signs of lasting trauma. I'm comfortable reducing sessions to as needed rather than regular weekly appointments. She handed me a folder of resources for future support if needed. You might want to schedule a check-in session during major transitions like starting kindergarten, or if any family changes occur. But overall, Jenny has shown remarkable resilience. That's a direct result of your consistent parenting through this crisis. You gave her exactly what she needed to heal. I cried in my car in the parking lot after that appointment, feeling relief wash through me. My daughter was okay. We'd made it through. The following weekend, I took Jenny on a trip to visit my mother, our first real vacation since the emergency surgery. My mother had offered to cover the flights, and I'd saved up enough for a small beach rental. Watching Jenny play in the sand, building castles and chasing waves with pure joy on her face, I realized we'd both healed more than I expected. She was back to being a carefree kid, laughing and playing without the shadow of confusion or fear. And I'd learned to accept help from my support system, rather than trying to handle everything alone, which had made me stronger instead of weaker. My mother sat beside me on the beach watching Jenny. "You did good," she said quietly. "I know it's been hard, but you protected her and got her through this. That's what matters." I felt tears slip down my cheeks and didn't bother wiping them away. The ocean breeze dried them quickly anyway. My promotion at work became official the week after we returned from the beach trip. My boss organized a small celebration with cake in the break room, and several coworkers stopped by my desk privately afterward. "I've been so impressed watching you handle everything these past few months," one woman said. "You're stronger than I could ever be." Another coworker mentioned that she'd been following the legal situation and thought I'd done an amazing job protecting Jenny. The recognition felt validating after months of feeling judged and questioned about my parenting by Rachel, by family members who didn't understand, and even by my own doubts during the hardest moments. My team saw my strength and professionalism, and that meant more than they probably realized. Coraline and I established a regular babysitting arrangement where Isla would watch Jenny twice a week, giving me time for errands and self-care. The routine helped Jenny feel secure with trusted caregivers and gave me breathing room to maintain my own well-being. Isla was saving money for college and appreciated the steady income, making it beneficial for everyone involved. On those evenings, I'd go to the gym or meet a friend for coffee or simply sit in a bookstore reading without worrying about anything. The space to breathe made me a better parent when I came home. 3 weeks later, I received official notice that Rachel had completed her probation requirements, including all mandated counseling sessions. The letter explained that her criminal case was now closed, but it also confirmed that the restraining order remained in effect per the judge's original ruling and would continue until Jenny turned 18. I called Jeremy immediately, needing reassurance. "This doesn't change anything legally, right?" "Nothing changes," he confirmed. "Rachel has no legal avenue to challenge the custody arrangement. The restraining order stands regardless of her probation status. You're protected, Jenny's protected, and this chapter is truly closed." I hung up feeling confident for the first time in months. The nightmare was over. Rachel couldn't touch us legally. Jenny was thriving. My career was advancing, and our little family of two was stronger than ever. Jenny's kindergarten orientation happened on a warm Tuesday morning in late August. I held her hand as we walked through the bright hallways covered in alphabet posters and student artwork. She bounced beside me, her new backpack making soft thuds against her shoulders with each excited step. The school was 15 minutes from our apartment, in a completely different district from where Rachel had tried to enroll her. No one here knew about the custody battle or the forged documents or any of the nightmare we'd survived. Jenny's teacher stood at the classroom door greeting families. She introduced herself and knelt down to Jenny's level, asking about her favorite color and whether she liked to draw. Jenny answered with confidence, no hesitation or fear in her voice. The classroom had reading corners and art stations and a carpet with numbers for circle time. Other kids were already exploring, pulling out toys and books while their parents talked near the doorway. Jenny looked up at me with questioning eyes. I nodded and she ran toward a group building blocks, immediately asking if she could help with their tower. I watched her laugh when another girl showed her how to balance the pieces just right. The first parent conference came 6 weeks into the school year. I sat in one of the tiny chairs across from Jenny's teacher, my knees practically touching my chest. She pulled out a folder with Jenny's drawings and writing samples. Her academic skills are strong, the teacher said. She knows her letters and numbers, she's starting to read simple words, and her fine motor control is developing nicely. Then she smiled. But what really stands out is how well adjusted she is socially. She makes friends easily, she's kind to other children, and she handles transitions really well. Some kids struggle with separation or following routines, but Jenny just jumps right in. I felt tears prick my eyes and blinked them back quickly. The teacher noticed anyway. She's clearly got a stable home environment, she continued. Whatever you're doing, it's working. That's all any parent wants to hear. I thanked her and walked out to the parking lot where Jenny was waiting with the after-school program supervisor. She ran to me with a painting of our apartment building, complete with stick figures of us in the window. I met Jeremy at his office on a Friday afternoon in October to make my final payment. The receptionist smiled when I walked in, recognizing me from my many previous visits. Jeremy came out to greet me himself instead of having her send me back. We sat in his office and I handed him a check for the remaining balance. He looked at it, then at me. You did it, he said. Paid off every penny. I nodded, feeling lighter than I had in months. The legal fees had been crushing, especially combined with medical debt, but I'd made it work through careful budgeting and the promotion at work. Jeremy leaned back in his chair. You know, I've been practicing family law for 18 years. I've seen a lot of custody cases, a lot of parents fighting for their kids. He paused. What you did, how you handled this whole situation, I'm really proud of you. You could have fallen apart. You could have let Rachel's manipulation get inside your head. But you stayed focused on Jenny. You fought with integrity, and you never gave up. His words meant more than he probably realized. There had been so many moments when I doubted myself, when Rachel's accusations about my fitness as a parent had echoed in my mind during the hardest nights. Having someone who'd seen the whole legal battle tell me I'd done well, that I'd handled it right, it validated everything I'd been through. Thank you, I said, for everything. Not just the legal work, but for believing me from the start. He stood and shook my hand. If you ever need anything, you call me. I mean that. I walked out of his office knowing I'd never have to go back for this case, but grateful to know he was there if I ever needed help again. Family gatherings became complicated after the custody case ended. Some relatives stopped inviting me to events, their loyalty to Rachel making my presence awkward. My aunt, who'd initially called me crying about pressing charges against Rachel, never apologized, just stopped calling altogether. Christmas cards from certain cousins stopped arriving. But other family members stepped up in ways that surprised me. My uncle on my father's side, who I'd barely spoken to in years, started calling monthly to check on Jenny and me. A second cousin I'd met maybe twice invited us to her daughter's birthday party and introduced me to everyone as her family, making it clear we were welcome. My mother flew out more often, making up for the years she'd kept distance because of her own complicated feelings about my single parenthood. The new normal settled into place gradually. I stopped expecting certain people to reach out and stopped feeling hurt when they didn't. The family members who understood what Rachel had done, who saw the manipulation and fraud for what it was, those relationships grew stronger. The others faded into polite distance or complete silence. I learned to be okay with that. Not everyone would understand my decisions or see the situation clearly, and that was their problem, not mine. As long as Jenny and I were safe, stable, and surrounded by people who genuinely supported us, the rest didn't matter. One evening in November, Jenny was coloring at the kitchen table while I made dinner. She looked up suddenly. Mommy, do you remember that toy bunny I had at Aunt Rachel's house? I paused, my hand on the pot handle. The purple one? She nodded. I miss that bunny. It was soft. Her tone was completely matter-of-fact, like she was mentioning a toy she'd left at a friend's house, not at the home of someone who'd tried to steal her. No emotional weight, no confusion, just a simple memory. "We could get you a new bunny," I offered. She considered this, then shrugged. "Okay, but can it be purple?" I smiled. "Sure, baby. Purple bunny coming up." She went back to coloring like nothing significant had happened. But for me, it was huge. Months ago, any mention of Rachel had sent Jenny into confusion or tears, asking why Aunt Rachel said those things, why she couldn't visit anymore, whether I was really her mommy. Now Rachel was just someone from the past, mentioned occasionally in the same casual way kids remember any other temporary caregiver. Her therapist had predicted this. Children are resilient when given consistent support and honest age-appropriate explanations. Jenny had processed what happened through play therapy and our careful conversations. She understood that Aunt Rachel made bad choices and couldn't be part of our lives right now, and she'd accepted that truth without taking it personally or feeling responsible. The emotional confusion had faded, replaced by the secure knowledge that I was her mother and our life together was permanent. The single-parent support group met every other Wednesday at a community center near my work. I'd been attending for 3 months when a new member joined in late November. He introduced himself as Jerry, recently divorced with a 7-year-old son. Over the next few meetings, we talked during the coffee break about custody schedules and co-parenting challenges. He was funny and kind, listening carefully when others spoke, and offering practical advice without judgment. After the December meeting, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime outside the group. I said yes, but made it clear I needed to take things slowly. He understood completely, sharing that he was cautious too after his divorce. Our first coffee date lasted 2 hours, talking about everything except our kids. Second date was lunch near my office. Third date was dinner at a quiet restaurant where we finally talked about our children and what we wanted for their futures. I didn't introduce him to Jenny, not yet. The experience with Rachel had made me incredibly careful about who got access to my daughter. I needed to be sure about Jerry, to know him well enough to trust my judgment before bringing him into Jenny's world. He respected that completely, never pushing or asking when he'd meet her. We took things slow, building a foundation between us first before considering how a relationship might affect our kids. The custody battle had taught me to be more cautious, yes, but also more confident in my own judgment about people. I'd learned to spot manipulation, to trust my instincts when something felt wrong, and to prioritize Jenny's well-being above everything else. 1 year after Rachel tried to keep Jenny, I stood in our kitchen making breakfast before school. Jenny sat at the table already dressed, swinging her legs and humming while she looked at a picture book. Sunlight came through the window, highlighting the crayon drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. I cracked eggs into a pan and thought about how much had changed. We had a stable routine now. Jenny woke up at the same time every morning, got dressed without complaint, ate breakfast while I packed her lunch. I dropped her at the school, went to work at my new position with better pay and hours, picked her up from after-school program, came home to dinner and homework and bath time and bedtime stories. Simple, predictable, safe. My career had advanced beyond what I'd imagined possible a year ago. The promotion had led to more responsibility and recognition at work. My boss mentioned potential for further advancement, maybe a management position in another year or two. The medical debt was manageable now, broken into monthly payments I could actually afford without panic. The legal fees were completely paid off. Our little apartment felt like home in a way it hadn't before, decorated with Jenny's artwork and photos of us with Coraline's family and my mother. Jenny was thriving in kindergarten, bringing home glowing progress reports and stories about her friends. No lasting trauma from Rachel's actions, according to her former therapist. No nightmares, no separation anxiety, no questions about whether I was really her mother. She was just a happy 6-year-old excited about school and friends and her upcoming birthday party. I flipped the eggs and called Jenny to the table. She bounced over, climbing into her chair and immediately starting to tell me about the science project her class was doing with plants and sunlight. I listened and responded and felt grateful for the ordinary morning, the stable routine, the secure future we'd built together. Jenny's 6th birthday party happened on a Saturday in early December. I'd rented space at a local community center with a big room for activities and cake. 20 kids from her kindergarten class showed up, along with Coraline and Isla, several co-workers who'd become friends during the custody battle, and my mother who'd flown in the day before. The room filled with noise and laughter, kids running between the craft table and the game area while adults talked near the snack table. I watched Jenny in the center of it all, wearing her favorite purple dress and a paper crown, completely in her element. She showed her friends the pin the tail on the donkey game, organized teams for musical chairs, and made sure everyone got a turn at the craft station where they decorated picture frames. Coraline appeared beside me holding 2 cups of punch. She handed me one. "Look at her," she said, nodding toward Jenny. "That's a happy, secure kid." I smiled. "Yeah, she is. You did that. You fought for her and you won, and now look. She's got all these friends, she's confident, she's thriving. This is what you protected." My mother joined us, slipping her arm around my waist. "I'm so proud of you," she said quietly. "I know I wasn't as supportive as I should have been at first. But watching you this past year, seeing how you handled everything, you're an amazing mother." The validation from the two most important women in my support system made my throat tight. "Time for cake," I called out, and 20 kids rushed to the table. Jenny stood at the head with her birthday cake decorated with butterflies and flowers. We sang happy birthday while she grinned, waiting patiently for us to finish. "Make a wish," someone called. She closed her eyes tight, thought for a moment, then blew out all 6 candles in one breath. Everyone cheered. Later, after the party wound down and guests left, Jenny clutched her new stuffed animal, a purple bunny, to replace the one left at Rachel's house. She was exhausted but happy, talking nonstop about her favorite presents and which games were the most fun. I got her ready for bed, listening to her recap the entire party in detail. She fell asleep mid-sentence, the bunny tucked under her chin. I stood in her doorway watching her breathe, steady and peaceful. The nightmare that started in an emergency room had transformed into this, a secure child sleeping safely in her own bed after a birthday party surrounded by people who loved her. We'd survived Rachel's betrayal and come out stronger. Our little family of 2 was enough, more than enough. The future stretched ahead, stable and secure, built on the foundation of legal justice and the bond between mother and daughter that no one could ever break again.